Last night I watched Taxi Driver for the first time. I barely knew anything about it other than that, he's a taxi driver and that it's said to be brilliant and that Robert De Niro talks threateningly to a mirror. It is undeniably brilliant, partly for its uniqueness. This is a film about a disillusioned man in New York becoming increasingly radicalised, but nothing really happens for most of the runtime. I'd say a good chunk at the beginning of Taxi Driver feels totally purposeless, plotless scenes with mostly mundane dialogue, which is obviously kind of the point, but it still takes one hell of a director to make that work without it becoming boring to watch. All of it comes down to the mood and atmosphere that's conveyed through the camera. And it's also odd that the big climax you feel this film is building towards, the one I was expecting, Travis murders Senator Palantine, that never quite happens, and we veer away into a different climax, and then the film ends kind of exactly where it began, as though nothing really happened at all, none of it particularly mattered or made any difference. Arguably, anyway. We'll discuss that later, but almost 50 years on, the idea of a story that still feels innovative and unexpected to me, especially considering Joker was so heavily influenced by it, that's a testament to how good this film is, right? The oddest and best thing, I think, is that Taxi Driver is absolutely a character study, and yet one in which you're told nothing about his past. There's very little evidence for Travis. He barely expresses a lot of his feelings. We don't see any massive events that might have shaped him. Okay, we kinda do, but there's surprisingly little to sink your teeth into from a psychoanalytical point of view. But rather than that feeling like the film lacks depth to the character, it instead feels like the film didn't need to show us, that it was a strength to be subtle, and in comparison, it actually makes Joker feel very unsubtle and sometimes a little too on the nose in its portrayal of Arthur Fleck. I suppose my point is that Taxi Driver isn't a film concerned with analysing Travis Bickle, helping you understand how someone becomes like him. It's more concerned with just making you feel how he does, presenting a mood and an atmosphere and a way of life that just feels so easy to slip into. That is monumentally powerful here. Although, that said, there is a lot to pick apart about Travis Bickle still. I watched this last night, I've made far too many notes. We're now going to try and go through a lot of it. What can we understand of Travis from Taxi Driver? I've tried to structure this as best I can, but I think the blurry, dreamlike quality of the film makes it hard to speak about in clearly structured sections. Let's start with the obvious though. A core theme here is loneliness and how incredibly damaging it can be. Whilst we hopefully don't relate to Travis's actions exactly, I reckon we can all relate to his feelings, the loneliness, the inertia, the underlying frustration it leaves him with, feeling trapped and alone in such a very busy world. Loneliness on its own can be crippling enough, and Scorsese captures that so poignantly here. So many of Travis's interactions place him at a distance to people, behind a window, peering through mirrors, positioned with a seat at the very end of the table. But what we're also left with is someone whose life is stripped of all purpose and direction.
All my life needed was a sense of someplace to go.
Meaninglessness is a part of this. This is where the fact so little happens in this film becomes important, because that's how his life feels. Everything feels just like one blurred, hazy ongoing blob of events that don't really impact each other. I love the way the opening credits just seamlessly merges into the opening scene as Travis walks out from the smoke that his car had been driving through. So many scenes here that would be big, dramatic, formulative events in other films just don't feel that here. That classic kind of scene where the friend gives some advice to a protagonist that either heeds or ignores it. Here, that's just a conversation that offers nothing and peters out awkwardly. Travis's first visit all tooled up to the Palantine rally. Rather than being filmed with great tension about what's going to happen, it just veers into a long, slow conversation with an agent. Travis doesn't feel his life really matters. There's no meaning and no connection, which is a part of it. We often create meaning out of our connections in life, but how empty and repetitive everything feels to Travis leaves him kind of trapped and completely stripped of his agency, to the extent he becomes an incredibly passive character who can't break out of his inertia. And I think that's a big part of his anger, frustrated at feeling trapped and yet also having nowhere to put any of this frustration, to which it all ends up bottled and passive. People often think about anger as some bad thing you're supposed to, get rid of, but it doesn't really work that way. We all have feelings of anger, and ideally you either need somewhere good to channel them so that they can become a positive, which anger absolutely can be, or somewhere safe to vent a little when you need to. Stripped of both of those, you could argue Travis never really gets control over his anger, and it ends up in control of him as this ever-growing tidal wave that, when the wave breaks, he is swept along by it. I think A Taxi Driver itself could be a fitting metaphor for a lot of those struggles. He's not someone forming connections to his passengers, they are separated by seating, he only sees them through a mirror. They have their lives and their relationships and their places to go, he's just invisible, in the front with nowhere particular to go at all, just wherever they want him to drive and then back off to somewhere else again, cycling round and round the city on repeat. Do his passengers ever remember him? Does he make any difference? So what can we make of this stuff? Well, yes, for one, we relate to how easy it is to fall into that loneliness, that passivity, that internal frustration. I reckon we can all empathise with how difficult that can be and how difficult it is to break away from. So I absolutely do not want to dismiss or undermine any of that in this analysis. There's a lot we could say just on the topic of loneliness. And yeah, you can say, well, why doesn't he form those connections? Why is he lonely? That's down to his decisions and actions and behaviour, surely. And yes, that's obviously definitely a part of it, his internal world, but that doesn't mean this environment of New York doesn't also play a role in him falling into this state, because it definitely does. We know we're affected by our environments, that's obvious. When I describe Travis as quite passive as well, we know that's not true all of the time. He takes great initiative to try and reach Betty, for example. I think trying to reach Betsy was his attempt to try and break away from all of this. I think in some senses getting a gun was also an attempt to break free of his frustrated inertia. Just it wasn't a good method, and one that kind of makes the situation worse. Travis never feels entirely in control of his decisions and behaviour. Not in a he's innocent way, just either passive and half asleep, or driven completely by this wave of anger and what that wants to do, which is basically something. Anything. Something big or exciting, something different that can leave a mark. That can not just make him stand out to others in this world and feel less invisible, but can also make his life stand out to him too. This thing that stops every day feeling like a Groundhog Day. There's a kind of attempt in that, I think, to prove to himself that he can have agency, power, can be alive. Constantly we see Travis with a desire to do something, but he never quite seems to know what. He struggles to voice it with Wizard.
I just want to go out. I really want to. I got some bad ideas in my head.
My favourite example is when he settles on his plan to murder Senator Palantine. Travis tries writing a note to leave behind.
Listen, you f***ers, you screwheads. Here is a man who would not take it anymore. Who would not let... Listen, you f***ers, you screwheads. Here is...
Here is what? Travis doesn't know. He doesn't really know what he's doing at all. He knows next to nothing about Senator Palantine. He has no sense of his policies. He doesn't know what killing him will change. His note isn't expressing any real conscious point to his actions, and for all this time he spent preparing and playing about with his weapons, he has next to no plan on how to actually kill him. Hence it goes so wrong. To me, that's one of the most striking things about this film. We have a protagonist who barely has any idea why he's doing the things he's doing. There's a lack of connection between his upstairs and downstairs brain is one way to see it. Totally driven by his anger though, and his unconscious feelings without so much control or direction over it himself. That's one of the sad ironies here really. He wants to do something to break out of his passivity and to find some direction, but this technically only leads him further away from control. This is the illusion of having agency and feeling powerful, getting to feel like he can do something. But does that mean he's in control? Does that mean he's making clear and aware decisions in his life? This is the difference between precisely directing a match towards a candle and just like spreading flames everywhere. I think that analogy works. That's what's so fitting about the fact he talks of his plans for murder like it is predetermined.
Now I see it clearly. My whole life is pointed in one direction. I see that now. There never has been any choice for me.
That is definitely to try and absolve himself from the moral questions by just saying, oh, this was fated to happen regardless, but it also shows how none of this is really finding agency and direction in his life. It's all a shallow, hasty attempt to do something that simply looks like agency and direction. None of this is confronting his problems so much as kind of compensating for them or covering them over. Before we move on, I will just mention dissociation as well. We know Travis was a Marine during Vietnam. He says as much, and whilst he does often lie, a level of combat training kicks in here, and I think the way he tends to stand when talking to authority figures suggests time in the Marines. Not the Army, they're two different things. I have a billion comments on my Godfather video telling me that because I accidentally said Michael Corleone was in the army when he's actually in the Marines. So yeah, there's a distinction there. But the point being, it's plausible that Travis is struggling with trauma, which might leave his stress response system prone to fall into what you could call hypo-aroused states, such as dissociation. I imagine that's what Scorsese might have been trying to convey in shots like this one. I don't know, I just thought it's worth mentioning. Let's move on to a bigger point. Or let's do that after I throw this thing your way.
I gotta get organized. You know, little things like my apartment, my possessions. I should get one of those signs that says one of these days I'm gonna get...
World Anvil. World Anvil is a really cool thing, and they're still sponsoring me, till death do us part. Listen to me passionately talk about them. World Anvil is an online tool for world building, the anviling of worlds, character creation, campaign building, story planning, and even writing, and a load more stuff that can be great for anyone with creative projects or games. I use it for the planning of my novel. My organisation is chaotic, so World Anvil really helps. I love the way you can create timelines of events with hyperlinks from those pages to a character bio or some other event or information or whatever. Like, my memory isn't the best for the minor details of stuff I invent, so when I'm reading back information about the history of my novel's world and I think, who is this person? I can only half remember. Or what order did these events happen in? Why did that become a social custom? Whatever. I can very easily click a hyperlink to a different page I wrote and check. The ability to create entire timelines based on your own invented calendars and be able to link everything to it, including changes in the maps for if a city gets destroyed or something like that. That is so damn cool. And there are other tools too. Not all of them are ones I need for my novel personally, but they all still look really handy, and I've always found everything pretty easy to use. If it's your thing, they also have a Discord, and they run all sorts of events and community support and stuff, like this summer camp they've been running. It's all really great, and I enjoy getting to promote them. So there is a link in the description, and there's a pinned comment that entitles you to 51% off. Yep, it's 51 now. All their subscriptions with the code TREE. If you want to try it out first, they have a free version so you can get familiar, you know, take your time, take it out for a nice dinner and see where things lead. Yeah, World Anvil. If Travis has one clear relationship we're shown in this film, it is, of course, his relationship to...
We the people!
Not anyone in particular, just this category of people that may extend to everyone he doesn't offer an exception to, and especially seems to mean black people. And I think without ever really voicing it, you feel the underlying racism in the way his eyes linger on various black characters throughout this, or this cut from shooting the shop robber to aiming his gun at the TV. Travis is disgusted by this world of the animals, as he calls it, the scum.
Whores, skunk pussies, buggers, queens, fairies, dopers, junkies. Sick. Venal.
And yet you can't help feel some level of walking contradiction here, because Travis surrounds himself with these people. He took a job where he drives them around the city, where he constantly sees them. even before then, he would already drive around the city at night anyway, which he suggests is because he can't sleep, and that's probably a part of it, but even in a pre-internet world, there are various different things you can do when you can't sleep at night. Driving around, staring at the people that most repulse you, isn't your only option. Travis points out that a lot of cab drivers won't drive in certain areas and won't take spooks, but that he himself doesn't care.
Some won't even take spooks. Don't make no difference to me.
Which again highlights this passive side. But it does make a difference to him. Else why is he so regularly talking about the scum needing to be washed away, streets cleaned up, dealt with? I'm using the word scum simply because he says it, by the way. That's his feelings, not mine at all. The first obvious point here is, yes, Travis might find himself in a better position were he not to absorb his life in this world, following the people he is repulsed by, making that his only real image of New York and what other people are like. And yeah, even on some level, I think attempting to date Betsy is an attempt to do that, to interact with other facets of life, find connection there, hopefully feel a less cynical recognition. There is a very positive action within his attempt to court Betsy. However, Travis still can't help being pulled towards this bleaker world, and he lacks awareness to even recognise that about himself. In fact, he even tries to pull Betsy into this world by taking her to the pornographic theatre on their first date without him ever really giving an adequate reason for doing so. He similarly rejects the idea that he could ever go to a commune and find more positive social experiences there, again without ever really giving an adequate reason for why not.
I don't go to places like that.
Oh, come on, why not?
Nah, I don't get along with people like that.
This darker, redder world is what's familiar to him. Either because it always has been, we don't know much about his past, or because the experiences of being repulsed by them and getting to project onto them, that fulfills such an unconscious need that he can't quite manage to break away. I don't think it's a stretch to say Travis projects his own feelings of self-hatred and disgust onto others, finding the exact sort of people he'd find most easy to project those feelings onto. No wonder he is drawn to them. So on one level, and again there are so many different, sometimes contradictory motives behind a lot of his actions that it's hard to talk about them clearly, but on one level his fantasies about eradicating and destroying all of these people are caught up in ideas of eradicating these unwanted and undesirable aspects of himself. Cleansing New York of the scum becomes symbolic of cleansing himself, except that's not how it actually works. Although in both his plans to murder the senator and the final showdown we get, in both plans he wanted it to end with killing himself, the final eradication. There is perhaps an unconscious feeling that he can't be anything more, anything better, anything good. The best he can do is destroy the bad, destroy this ugliness, and consequently also destroy himself. And so I should raise that as a possible idea. Perhaps Travis can't envision himself joining a commune, doesn't feel he belongs in Betsy's world, and therefore either needs to draw her into his world or else to interpret her world as just as empty and meaningless as his one, make it feel like it's the same thing, just disguised differently.
I see a lot of people around you, and I see all these phones and all this stuff on your desk. That means nothing.
Perhaps this is all really because Travis doesn't believe he could ever be that kind of better person. Doesn't believe he has that side to him even now, can't feel much love for himself. It would be far, far better for Travis to focus on cultivating what's good about the world than on eradicating what's bad, but it's hard for him to see that, I think, because he doesn't see it in himself. You can't just eradicate the bad though, it doesn't quite work that way. I think often it just draws you deeper into it. However, there is one other important thing in his relationship to these people that we need to discuss. The fantasy of getting to eradicate these people has always been there, I think. I actually wonder if one aspect of choosing to kill Palantine is because he talks so endlessly about the people getting to rule, and Travis being disgusted by the people, therefore Palantine would be bad, maybe. The fantasy has always been there, and therefore Travis increasingly is looking for a way to do something and a place to put his frustration. That fantasy has always been there, and therefore, as Travis is increasingly looking for something to do and a place to put his frustration, the idea of killing these people makes sense to him. However, before then he is generally quite passive and in a semi-indifferent state. Part of the allure of driving around town for Travis is that he gets to feel like an invisible observer. He's not actually a part of this world, he's not actually really there at all, he's just some omniscient set of eyes. That's one way to take these feelings of loneliness and being invisible and make them feel kind of powerful, you know? A level of superiority to that. It makes it very easy to project as well. He's safely tucked away in his taxi, no one enters his front seat, he can always wash the stench away from his car, he views everything through windows or mirrors, keeps his indifference, his silence, because he's not actually there. Screens are a big symbol used in this film. I think there is a deliberate link between the way he views people through the windscreen of his car and the way he views the pornographic movies in the theatre. You can note the disgust mixed with morbid interest on his face. It's the same thing. And again, he's not there, he's not a part of that movie, he's just an out-of-space spectator who gets to observe it without feeling like it can affect him. But if the world doesn't affect you, how can you ever connect to it? And the thing is, he's not some omniscient observer, he is there, he's a part of this world, and eventually he becomes faced with an experience where he realises that. A girl, Iris, jumps into the back of his taxi and asks him to drive, get her away quickly. When Travis hesitates, the man Matthew, the trafficker, takes her back, offers Travis $20 to forget about it, and then leads her away against her will. It's all very well telling yourself it makes no difference to you, pretending you're not quite there, you're just some purer observer who can't be touched by any of this, but when you're put in a situation like this one, being indifferent and passive then becomes a problem, because, you know, if he had done something, Iris might have been safe from Matthew, but he doesn't. He's been indifferent to fights he's seen breaking out. He's been indifferent to the idea of a man murdering his wife. But when he's put in a position where he's asked to do something, to be involved, then it's more difficult. And so in that sense, I reckon this experience is part of what shakes Travis from his sleepy passivity to an extent and makes him so keen to do something. After this encounter, he talks about there being a change in his life, and then the next scene is him buying a gun. Let's talk about masculinity, shall we? There is an underlying struggle with masculinity in this film, in my opinion, which is always nice to see. Toxic masculinity, as the phrase has become. So often in films that falls into just saying things like, these are bad people you should stay away from, or showing the negative effects this kind of person can have on others, and that's obviously important, but it's nice to also see some stories from the perspective of said toxic male and show us, you know, they struggle with all of this stuff too, and that men can be just as much victims of, like, patriarchal ideas. At a couple of points, Travis is referred to as a cowboy. I think that's just because his boots are cowboy ones, unless I've missed something there on my first watch. It's equally fitting that he wants a .44 Magnum, and look, I know nothing about guns. I know that gun wasn't around in the heyday of cowboys, even if revolvers were, but it is the iconic powerful gun. It's the one from Dirty Harry. For going about doing a spot of what you see as justice, cleaning up the streets, taking law into your own hands, it's the gun you'd probably think of. Am I right there? I don't know, but Travis says he is neither a cop nor a cowboy. In fact, I think he pushes back against any labels put upon him in this film. He doesn't want to fit in anywhere. He is no one. This omniscient, invisible observer. And yet I can't help feeling that the concept of cowboys does appeal to him here. In a way, it's an image that takes some of what he might not like about himself and flips it into positives. He's terribly alone. Well, the cowboy is this mysterious lone ranger. That feels positive. He's stuck in a state of passivity. Well, the cowboy can be master of his own destiny. He is surrounded by crime and the animals. Well, the cowboy can shoot them down. This kind of concept, all the guns, all the pointing them at the mirror, it appeals to Travis as the the image of the strong man, the alpha, the hero. There's a kind of double wound in the fact that Travis feels emasculated in the first place. I think we can understand why. The strong man is supposed to attract and provide for a woman. He's supposed to take care of himself, be master of his destiny, and when Travis doesn't feel like he's living up to those social expectations, it all becomes a hell of a pressure and an extra reason to feel bad about himself. If a man can't attract a woman, provide perfectly for her, and feel totally in control of all life, then apparently he's an abject failure. And what do you then think about that? You can, blame...
Look, come on! You're in a hell, and you're gonna die in a hell like the rest of us. Come on now!
You can feel worthless. The other thing Travis does is, of course, jump at something that will at least give him the illusion of feeling more like this rigid idea of a man. The guns, the being in shape, the taking law into his own hands. If there is a very loose but palpable pressure for men to be all of these type of things, then this is his way to deal with it. This is the cultural suggestion for how to manage feelings of emasculation. All of it culminating in a literal cowboy shootout where Travis is perversely hailed as the hero, the lone ranger who dispensed justice on his own, who saved the girl. There's a really interesting dark irony in that. And there are a lot of people who genuinely see Travis as a hero. Travis probably sees himself as a hero. He gets to do the classic movie things that look heroic. Forget for a second if it is actually heroic or not. This is the typical thing that looks it, that's why it matters to him. Lacking the awareness and ability to really tackle all these feelings of emasculation, which it would be really hard to do, especially in the 70s on your own, Travis resorts to kind of papering over the cracks, doing things that look masculine. Problem is, you might start depending on that stuff in order to feel like this idea of masculine, and if so, you might fall further and further into it. Who's to say Travis doesn't go out again looking for someone else to shoot? Who's to say the next situation isn't more morally questionable? Although let's also emphasise saving the girl. Travis wants to save Iris from this world of sex trafficking, and that is undeniably a good thing. I also think he does care about her to some extent, and he probably does want to do the right thing. That is all a part of this, but at the same time, his original plan was always to kill a senator that he knows nothing about. Basically because it would be something big to do that would make him known and seen, and probably is partly revenge against Betsy too. His original plan for Iris was just to post her a bit of money to get away that Matthew would have definitely intercepted, leaving her, I suspect, in trouble with him. He also ignores Iris's pleas not to shoot this man. He then tries to shoot himself in front of her, both incredibly traumatizing things to do. He doesn't even speak to her or acknowledge her in his rescue mission. Deep down, it's not actually about her, it's about what she symbolizes to him, which is getting to save the girl like classic masculine heroes do. Originally he wanted to save Betsy from the man that he interpreted has no real connection to her.
I would say he has quite a few problems.
Now he wants to save Iris. She went into his taxi before and he didn't save her. What does he feel about that? Guilt? Concern? Did doing nothing make him feel weak? A cowboy, he might have imagined, would have probably acted in that situation. Let's move on though. There's an idea called the Madonna whore complex. It's an idea I'm kind of uneasy about mentioning, but it is relevant to this film. The idea basically being an attitude of seeing women either as saintly idealised Madonnas or as sex workers in a way that's very degrading towards them. At the beginning of this film, Travis's two experiences we see involving women are, one, the character Betsy, who he very much idealises despite never having actually spoken to her and even being a little possessive.
They cannot touch her.
And the women he sees in dirty movies. I imagine he has had other experiences too, but all we've got is what the film shows us. In terms of Betsy, alongside the idealisation, or I suppose as a part of it, he's also projecting himself onto her, that she feels the same way he does about life.
I think you're a lonely person, and I see all these phones and all this stuff on your desk, and it means nothing. I saw the way you carried yourself, that you're not a happy person. And I think you need something.
He's talking about himself there. whilst desperately mixing Betsy into both what he needs as well as being someone exactly like him, someone who will understand how he feels in a world where he's so invisible, but he doesn't know her. What I love about their cafe scene is how little interest he shows to get to know her, taking what she starts to say and flipping it back onto himself.
Christ, the organizational problems.
I know what you mean. I got the same problems. I gotta get organized.
I don't think Betsy is lonely. Not particularly. I mean, I think if you told anyone they were lonely or they're not a happy person or any of that, I think it would hit at their self-doubt and leave them thinking for a moment, am I? Is that true? Maybe I am. But really this is about his own feelings. Imagining her as the angelic being to save him from his turmoil, except that's an idea that makes him feel quite vulnerable, so he has to flip it into her being the one that needs saving by him. He's the one to break her free. Why does he take her to the dirty movie? Maybe it's because they do repulse him, so it's kind of like, look how repulsive I am. This is my world. You don't want to be with me, do you? Look at me. Surely not. Maybe. Maybe it's because her own world feels so alien to him. Maybe it's because Wizard's questionable story of promiscuity makes him think women might like this kind of thing. Maybe it's just because this is what he does and wants to show her his life. Perhaps it's even marrying the idea of the Madonna and mistress into one interaction. The interesting thing though is that taking her there sabotages his hopes at a relationship, and I reckon there is at least one part of him that's intended that. One, because a relationship with her feels too alien, she feels too unattainable as he sees her. He expects it is doomed to fail, so he does something that would prove that fact. And two, because if this was Travis's attempt to reach out, the fact that it fails becomes extra reasoning to embrace his obsession with this darker world, extra reason to go down this path. I tried to be someone else, but it didn't work. Maybe I'm just destined to become this guy. Maybe it was all predetermined. I can't be anything more. I don't deserve anything other than this self-destructive quest against the world. Being rejected by Betsy becomes a reason to indulge his fantasies, I suppose you could say. Perhaps similarly reaching out to Wizard and him giving Travis awful advice. Well, I tried to reach out and it didn't work, so clearly this is what I have to do. Clearly I can't be helped. Betsy leaves him and doesn't answer his calls, and we get this wonderful shot that pans away from him to show the corridor. Without Betsy, there are no other options left or right. He feels trapped, stuck into this singular journey that leads him out into the dark reds of the street. A dark red that will consume the climax of this film. And he's angry with her. She's not the all-good angel who's going to save him now, so she becomes the sinner. She's cold and distant. He says she's going to hell. Splitting is quite obviously at work in a lot of this. And then he finds Iris again. She's someone who much more clearly needs saving from the world of the scum. Whether there is any romantic notions with Iris, I don't know. I hope not, because she's 12 years old. He seems more fatherly in his attitude towards her. But then he does also take her to a cafe like his date with Betsy. And they're both visually made to look similar in this film, so that could be the movie suggesting it. But I've already said saving her isn't really about her. I don't think morality is his motive here. I think she just happens to be a good reason, or even excuse, to enact his deeper feelings and desires about wanting to do something, wanting to eradicate something, wanting to pour out his anger. The thing I can't help wondering is, does he actually save her? Because getting her away from sex traffickers is undeniably a good thing. Please don't take this as me minimising that fact, but he still frees her in a way that she'd find traumatic, and it also sends her back to her parents, people she ran away from, going incredibly far to get away from them, and apparently seeing her life with Matthew as preferable to living with her parents. She might not mean that really, it might just be something she says. We have no idea what her parents are like. They could be very good people, and it is definitely good to take Iris away from Matthew and his other associates. However, it's just interesting we never hear anything from Iris, just her parents' voice instead, which I think is probably meant to suggest she has no voice in anything that's happened here, and yeah, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it definitely expresses that she's not really the focus. How this ends for her isn't really what's important to him. And the point of what Travis achieves, yeah, let's discuss that a bit more. Travis talks a lot about washing away the grime of the streets. Reference is made to the flood myths. And I think that's important because it kind of reinterprets destruction, eradication. Interprets it as something positive and clean. Makes it seem good. Not destructive, but cleansing, you know? But again, these deep reds of the film that Travis has so longed to wash away, the shootout we get is far redder than anything else in this film. Travis kills a load of people who are bad, and he saves Iris. Yes. However, does that eradicate sex trafficking in New York? No, this is just 3 people. Someone else will almost certainly spring up and take Matthew's place. There's almost certainly other people already doing this on a bigger level. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do nothing. There's a point I'm building towards here, okay? Travis, despite desiring it, also isn't killed or even arrested. He's left to carry on working as an ordinary cab driver again. Travis is also hailed as a hero and gets his name in the paper for a little bit, but ultimately that doesn't amount to much. He's still a taxi driver. People will quickly forget the event. Betsy comes into his taxi and asks him how he is. We don't particularly know what her intentions are here, but either way, Travis shows little interest in Betsy anymore. And then the film ends. You know, if half the point of this big action, this doing something that will stop him feeling stuck and invisible, make him known, something that will make a difference, if that was the point, then it hasn't worked particularly well, because Travis's life itself seems not too different. Does he feel like he's made a difference to his own life? Does he really feel like anything's changed here? In terms of all the problems Travis began the film with, yeah, none of them have changed beyond the slight boost to his ego about getting to be the heroic cowboy for a moment. Travis doesn't really overcome anything. Arguably, it's good that he's moved on from Betsy and doesn't want her anymore, but I don't think that's really him taking away anything from the experience with Betsy. I think he'll enact the same idealizations with someone else, or potentially his lack of interest in her suggests Travis giving up on the idea of relationships altogether, now very much favouring these dark red streets over the idea of the telephone. The floods didn't really wash away anything, neither of New York nor of his inner self. Surely everything that happened is just likely to repeat again, only next time it might not be for such an understandable cause. If Travis isn't a villain yet, and I don't think he necessarily is, he would probably become one at some point. I know there's a lot of stuff I've missed this video, even from my notes. I wanted to mention about the often mischievous grin Travis uses, particularly towards authority. I wanted to talk about alexithymia, which is basically an inability or struggle to understand and express feelings, to tentatively wonder if that applies to Travis, because despite all his diary entries, they are so often lacking in much expression beyond the basics. And there is also a tendency in this film for Travis to repeat phrases. But I didn't really know what to make of these things, so I'd be keen to hear from people who know this film much better than I do. It's an incredible movie, I'd highly recommend it, but please, like the video. Let me know what I missed or got wrong. Subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Luke Hoare, Treat Trukeba, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Billy Lee Myers Jr., Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell and Michael Hart. Thank you.